Good morning. Good to see you.
Good to see you. How's Minnesota?
You know, it's much like the rest of the world. It's confined to the walls of my home and my neighborhood. So
yeah,
there's some sun finally, which has been nice. We had snow last week. This weekend, we built a very large snowman, and then it melted the next day. But there's like one last remaining residue of snow. But other than that, it's very much spring. The robins are out, and we're feeling it. We're doing it.
Good.
Hey guys, so David here from FreeWill. Absolutely pleasure to meet you both. Jada and Savannah have said absolutely fantastic things.
Nice to meet you, David.
Nice to meet you.
For anyone listening in, we've got about 5 minutes till we kick off. Please encourage to introduce yourself in the chat. We want this to be really collaborative across the board, so get the conversation going, don't be shy. You'll see our panelist faces here, but we'll speak to you in about 5 minutes. So we've got a couple of minutes now until we actually officially kick off. I guess a unique problem that we're all facing, no matter what sector we work in, is adjusting our work from home environment. I both see you have perfectly placed out. Heather, there's some nice plants in the background. Dan, you have gone for the very safe option of a wall. What sort of things would you encourage folk, or have you seen any particularly good or bad examples of work from home backdrops?
Heather, what do you think? Do you have any particular horror stories yet?
Oh, no horror stories, just everyone's dog. Like the first all staff meeting we had was like the Brady Bunch, but with everyone's dogs. It was
Love it.
really chaos and kind of amazing.
The wall is a very intentional choice, and at any moment we could be interrupted by one of my two children who don't quite understand why I have to be isolated in the.
I completely understand. How old are your kids?
It doesn't at all. I've got an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old.
Okay.
The 8-year-old's a bit more adept at understanding social boundaries, but not the 6-year-old. I have a coworker whose cat, Norm, likes to come into the meeting just at random times, and particularly between 3:30 and 4:30 when he's hungry. So Norm is a regular fixture in our meetings now.
That's very, very funny. What a challenge that absolutely did not exist 3 weeks ago.
Yeah. And I think some people forget, unfortunately, we've seen horror stories, folks forgetting that they're on video and then doing things that you would never do in a meeting. I'll leave it at that. I'm just going to let imagination.
There's a lot of things that could be encompassed with that.
There is.
Yeah, very, very funny. All right, guys, we've got a minute until we officially kick off. Thanks, folks who have commented in the Q&A, just to introduce yourselves. don't confine it just to now. We want to see people introducing themselves. I'll talk about questions in just a little bit, but please throw your questions into the mix. For everyone who is part of the attendees, welcome. This is actually going to be the first, we're running a webinar style today, but in 2 weeks, we're moving to more of a roundtable. We acknowledge that higher ed is facing some pretty unique challenges, not just to Daniel's point about children and animals being on the meetings, but actually things like refunding board, not something that you've ever had to contemplate before, but now realistic for most of the organizations out there. So today is a webinar, Q&A style. We've got two of the industry's leading voices here. We're so honored to have them. And we'll have a bit more instructions on the roundtables coming up at the end. But today is about a webinar and about a Q&A. So it's 1 o'clock. Let's get started. First, some ground rules. Please take copious notes. That's great. But know that you'll get a recording of this as well as the slides sent after the fact. So if you miss something, don't panic too much. You've all been muted, so your questions will have to be typed in. We want it to be orderly. We also want to give everyone a voice. So please put your questions in. It gives the people a chance to see, hey, if it's already been asked before, they can echo that or kind of give some nuance to what's happening at their organization. We'll open up the Q&A a bit later. So there'll be a formal Q&A with Jada and the two panelists. And then at the end, we'll open it up to all your questions. To chat, just type in all attendees, let other people see what you're thinking, because more than likely they'll be going through something similar. And both Heather and Daniel have generously offered to stick around for a little bit at the end, so 10 to 15 minutes, to get into more of a deeper discussion or just to chat about the state of play right now. Setting off what this half an hour will look like, and we will keep it to half an hour. Start off with some quick introductions, give a bit of a state of play. You were also generous to submit your surveys, and thank you so much for those who did it. We'll have the Q&A, both Heather and Daniel, you can see there to the side of your screen. Open it up and then talk about some next steps and getting into more of the niche discussions in a couple of weeks' time. You can see our faces to the side. Here they are again on the screen. I guess a quick 101 on FreeWill. Both Jada and I work at FreeWill. We're an online fundraising platform. We work with schools and nonprofits right across the US, including with Heather and Daniel here. We specialize in plan gifts, in gifts from folks' IRA, and gifts of appreciated stock. And to date, we've actually ticked over $1 billion in committed gifts for nonprofits around the US. Me personally, my name is David Tanti. You can tell by the accent, I'm actually calling from Brooklyn in New York. I've worked at FreeWill for quite a while now and work as a partnership manager, mostly specializing in K-12 and higher ed institutions. I'll now kick it over to Jada to do some quick introductions.
Absolutely. Thank you, David. So as you can see, my name is Jada Gale. I am calling in currently from the suburbs of Chicago, where we made the strategic move from New York to have a little bit more space, spend some time with family. So my family member's office, who I have taken over, they're actually big sports up me, but then definitely shoot me a chat and let me know. I am a member of FreeWill's Partner Success Team, so I work largely with our higher education partners, many of whom I see on today's call, so thank you guys for joining. My role is really to make sure that you guys have the tools and the strategy and the content to be really effective fundraisers. And so I'm excited to facilitate today's conversation so that we can kind of continue to build this community and provide you guys with the best resources possible. We also are joined by both Heather and Daniel here, representing Pacific Lutheran University and the College of St. Benedict. Each of you hi really quickly, but we'll be digging in a bit more into what your responsibilities are in your roles.
Great to be with all of you. Good morning. Or good afternoon, depending on what time zone you're in. We're on the Pacific coast. where we've been dealing with COVID-19 now for a few more weeks than some of you.
And hello, I'm Heather Piper Olson, and really excited about this conversation. So thanks so much for having me.
Great, and thank you again, guys. It's been so generous, not just for today, but in the preparations for today. We really appreciate having both of your insights available. We sent out a survey, and usually with these surveys you get a small response if it's just generally. We got a huge response, and I think that's not only speaks to the state of play right now, but also as a sector, higher ed really wants to collaborate and come together. So we want to see everyone lifting, and that was just echoed through so many of the survey results. At a really top line, a lot of anxiety right now. There's a lot of change, and that's completely fair enough. Folks are facing things for the first time. You see at the bottom there, 81% are having a refund. You've budgeted a lot of the times for these expenses and these revenues to come in. So that's a challenge, and it's a pretty sizable challenge. There's some adjustments being made, calling more donors, but big things like commencement and spring reunions are being cancelled, and there's not necessarily anything right now to replace them. All that said, it's a pretty big state of change. But the reason we're all here is not because we're going to get down and think like, oh, well, this is tough. We came here for ideas, and we had so many great ones come through in the survey. Remarkably, 2 of you are running campaigns to fund 3D printing of hospital and medical equipment on site. You've got the Fastener Labs there, so hats off to you for those folk. So we hear things like telecommunications, so videos, lunches with the president, messages from students, from faculty, from the development staff, really connecting with donors at a human level, at such an ultimately human time. So great ideas out there. And again, encourage you to type them in, start the conversation, and we're continuing this sort of opportunity sharing. It actually led us to a quote, and both Jada and I discussed this the other day. It's from the late Jeremy Panas, who some of you may know as veteran fundraiser. And I think it's pretty timely. He said, there's no perfect moment. And I guess when you take a step back and think of the role as a fundraiser, capital campaigns are there to build buildings. Your endowment funds are there to lower the tuition costs and keep, the universities and schools going. Your job as a fundraiser is pretty special because, not only are the causes out there, you're tasked with the pretty special role of funding those and finding the solutions and ultimately improving the schools and the world that we all share. So it is a crazy time, but there is always crazy times, and fundraisers can get through it, and in this instance you will get through it. So I'm actually going to pass across to Jada now to run the more formal Q&A. Shut up and pass to Jada.
David. Perfect. So let's just go ahead and kind of get into the meat of the conversation. Daniel's work with Pacific Lutheran University covers alumni and student connections, advancement, and communications and marketing on top of all of that. Heather, whose work at the College of St. Benedict focuses on strategic direction and leadership for all of the major planned and annual giving programs. So I think it's safe to say that we have a lot of expertise here, and we're really excited to learn a little bit more about the approach that you guys are taking in a lot of these ways. So we start survey of how everyone was feeling about this entire situation. And we got a lot of responses that I think were not too surprising. Most of us are feeling pretty anxious right now. I think that's safe to say that, the majority of us are a little anxious. I think things have calmed down a little over the last week or so, at least in the direction of, the excitement and eagerness to move forward with fundraising. Luckily, we saw that the scared, sad, angry reactions were a lot lower than they have been in previous weeks. So I want to start with you, Heather. Can you tell us a little bit about so speaking to the size of your team, the current state of affairs in your state, and how you guys are kind of handling all of these different hurdles.
Sure. So I'm going to split my team kind of into two, because I do think they're, given the work they do, they're slightly different in their approaches. So I oversee the annual giving team. So we have a director of annual giving, and then she has 3 direct reports. So that team is who they are. They're adaptable. They are just, they were already in, facing the last quarter of the fiscal year. And so what they're just on getting that done. They were in the process of figuring out, we were meeting projections, where the gaps were, all of those things. The biggest adjustment with that team has been our call center and our student ambassador team. So this year we made a decision to go to beef up our texting platform. So we use Through Text, and we were also using ThankView to do a lot of stewardship and videos. So we've turned that student caller team, that student ambassador team, into a texting and video team, really with the idea that if we were going to be able to keep and so our goal is to get 1 to 3 touches, depending upon the really key live-ons that we want to get back. And anybody we had, we want to make sure we get in front of them multiple times before they get the next solicitation. We are ending a $100 million campaign on June 30th. We had already hit goal, thank goodness, but we still have about a $900,000, almost actually $980,000 goal towards our annual goal. So really, annual fund had already become everybody's main focus. So they're just making sure we sort of have all of those avenues taken care of. So and the Plan Gift team, I also, they're all direct reports of mine. So with that team, it really was about focus. So the first reaction, I think, was call the people that they were the most personally invested in and engaged with, and that's great. But what we wanted to do there was create some structure. So we made a goal. The first thing they had to do was call everybody they had visits scheduled with in the near future. Obviously cancel those, as Minnesota is under a stay-at-home order. Some people had some travel that they needed to reschedule. So try to get as many of those scheduled visits as okay. And then I want everybody to go through their entire portfolio one by one and plan a next step. So giving that group of people who are amazing and super, super motivated a little bit of focus, knowing too that most of them are extroverts, and it was going to be a little bit of an adjustment. So that's what we're doing on our end, and everybody is a great attitude so far, but these are new and challenging times for all of us.
Sure. And congratulations on hitting your goal.
Thanks.
That's a huge. Daniel, do you say that things are similar at Pacific Lutheran, that you guys are just, I'm sure that you work with an incredible team as well, but is it hard to get people to stay focused? Do you guys feel like you have a good grasp of what you need to move forward?
Yeah, it's an interesting situation. We have, in my division, we have 3 primary pillars, which you outlined. The marketing communications team has primarily been focused on both the public response and reaction and communication with what's happening, communicating with current students and their families, but then also jumping into the admissions, really leaning into admissions. Like many smaller schools, we're heavily tuition dependent. And so all of the resources of Marcom have gone into helping us do those in a virtual way and turn them into a virtual experience, a town hall forum with the president and that dean of admission, faculty, current students, and that's rolling out this week. So we had a couple weeks to throw it together. We'll see how it goes. That model, I think, will influence how we do donor engagement and replace some of our spring events and other things in different ways. But as thinking about this question, I continue to think about the varying ways in which it's not so much structural for me, more in a stage, their particular situation, And then also their strengths. We use Gallup strengths-based management and leadership to think about employee engagement. Some folks are great with this isolation. They're like, they would prefer to be working from home and have no challenges there. Others, dual income, no kids, have never had more time on their hands. Their social environment's been disrupted. And I would say there's a latent anxiety constantly that they're missing out on something, that they need to be engaged in something. How can I be helping? What should I be doing? Meanwhile, they've got colleagues, kids running around the house who have never been busier in their life. And so one of our challenges is to both care for the family and to care for the person and to care for the team, to focus on what's next. I've been talking a lot about taking this week by week. So we're doing scenario planning out through the summer, assuming this crisis keeps going and we are limited all the way through August. But at the same time, we're kind of adapting week by week and thinking about, okay, what do I need to focus on in this particular week? How do I restart and keep myself motivated in this time? And it's just so different based upon the varying areas. And the third for us would be the third pillar besides advancement function is that's between and a career office that really focuses most of our alumni programming on mentorship, internships, experiential learning, job placement, and career counseling for life. So we're very focused now on this graduating class and how do we help them have a meaningful connection with an alumni mentor? How do we help them think about transition into career when they will not have a physical graduation, when they're not going to be doing physical career counseling? So kind of each of those pillars is focused on a different element. And then the common thread is how do we care for the team and keep them motivated? Everything disrupted.
I think it makes total sense. And I think it leads perfectly well into the next point that I want to talk a little bit about, which are those traditionally in-person events, like classes obviously are changing, graduation, reunions, and that hits beyond just staff. It hits students, it hits alumni. So more than 80% of people reported that they have canceled events like these, with a large portion not even really being sure what those alternative plans are going to look like. Daniel, could you speak a little bit more to how Pacific Lutheran has managed those traditionally in-person events, what approach you guys were kind of taking, and how you will impact?
Fortunate that we don't have a big spring reunion push. Our giving day is in the fall, reunions are in the fall. So the biggest thing has been those yield events for admission, some cancellation of donor events where we were supposed to be out throughout the country. We have a relatively new president. He's only been in place for a few months. And so we had a presidential rollout plan that involved doubling the number of alumni and donor events throughout the country this spring. So finding different ways for people to meet him and relate to the mission of the university virtually. So we are planning a town hall with select donors for a few weeks from now, invitation only, similar to this format where donors could engage with the president, Q&A, hear what's happening on campus, and talk about the new strategic plan. In terms of the big commencement and rituals there, we have announced a cancellation of commencement, but we've taken the step of surveying the graduating class. We have we're a relatively small university. We have 800 or so students eligible for graduation this spring between our master's, doctorate, and undergraduate populations. And in a time when so much is out of our students' control, right? They've moved to online learning. Many of them have left campus, although not all. We let a larger percentage of our students stay on campus than some schools. I'm happy to talk about that if folks want to. We wanted to give them some agency over the ritual and their graduation. And so as part of the announcement, we can't do this in person. You've got two options. One is a virtual commencement on the original date, and one would be an in-person graduation in September back on campus, pending current health guidance at that time. So that survey is running right now, and is a strong. But I think that I think we hope that engagement helps to at least give them a sense of agency in this process.
That's very intriguing, the way that you guys are putting such an emphasis on getting that collective feedback from your students, but also hosting those kind of candid conversations with your select donors and people that are just really important for all decision making. Another issue that's pretty unique to higher education, refunds for room and board. 97% of you guys reported that you have or are considering. Not just room and board, it's things like food costs and other things. So Heather, I would love to hear you speak a little bit about how the college is supporting students and their families right now, whether that's through refunds, through emergency funds, and how you think that's going to impact the college financially over the next year and maybe even beyond.
Sure. So we have made the decision and announced that relatively early to be a refund, a prorated amount of room and board back to our families. And given a large majority of our students live on campus, we're a private liberal arts residential campus, it's a pretty big part of our revenue. And so we're facing a multi-million-dollar deficit right now with 3 months to go in the fiscal year. But we did feel it was the right thing to do. So we're working through what that means exactly. And obviously, like many of you, we're looking to see what share of the CARE Act comes our way, what role that is, and really the full picture of what other loss of auxiliaries we do. Our dining center is actually a conference and convention center as well for the region. So there were several events that had been canceled. I mean, those sorts of, all of those, looking kind of full scale at all of those things. And then also looking at, reallocation expenses that we're not incurring, and also scenario planning out from there. So all of that's in process right now. The first thing we did when we asked the majority of students to go home if they were able to, was we set up a student emergency fund. About 20% of our students are Pell eligible, which is pretty high for our area, I think. And a lot of people don't really realize that that's really sort of the percentage of students at St. Ben's that are Pell eligible, but even more so are really financially insecure. So the first thing we did was we had already had a student emergency fund set up as we were finding more resources that our student development team could use to just meet basic needs for our students in emergency situations. So we had a small fund set up already. We were able to immediately make that available to donors. Within about 24 hours, we'd raised about $50,000 at St. Ben's alone. Our partner school, St. John's University, which is the men's college 7 miles road, did the same. We funded separately with 2 separate nonprofits, but people were able to do that at both institutions. We've raised over $60,000, and right now that has gone to do things like $20,000 immediately in like food and gift cards for grocery stores. We were handing out gas money for students who needed it to go home. So we're working through all those things. We made it available for alums to donate frequent flyer miles. We were able to get people home. We are down to only 20 students on campus, and it was really important for us, though incredibly challenging, and I don't think there are right answers here. It was to live with the monastic community that is our founding order, and the average age of those women is 83. And so just knowing that we were in such close proximity to a vulnerable group of adults made it important that we tried as best we can actually to create distance for our students. So that's partly why we felt we really did need to do refunds. So that means here we are already with like a $890,000 gap to our annual fund goal, and now this much larger goal. So we are really committed to being partners with CFO, business office, and our board of trustees. At the end of the day, our trustees are our best donors and our best partners in this. So when we think about major gift work, it's really starting with them and being creative. But I will say, of course, we don't know right now what the right approach will be, but we're working together. We've got several scenarios we've put together. One of the things we've thought about at this moment in time is making sure we have a really good handle on who our donor advised fund donors are and who our IRA prospects are, our rollover prospects too. We know the CARE Act changes a little bit of those kinds of things too, but we want to make sure we arm our gift officers with the folks where they can go and have a very targeted, very specific conversation about how they can make an immediate impact on our students and on the institution.
That's really helpful. So thank you for sharing the insight, at least to give us a glimpse into how St. Ben's is thinking right now. I know another question around fundraising, but knowing that a lot of folks may need to hop off at 12:30, I'm going to go ahead and kick this back over to David to just kind of share some helpful materials and things for those who might be hopping off early. But we will dig right on into that fundraising question, as well as some Q&A from our other attendees here right after.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jada. I'm just going to round it out really quickly. And again, thank you so much, Heather and Daniel. Brilliant, brilliant insights. So please, those of you who have written in questions, stick around. We'll dig into that a little bit after the fact. I just wanted to share some materials, and again, the purpose of this is so everyone improves. We've put together some resources here. We've got a brilliant partner success team and marketers for FreeWill, and they've actually turned their energy towards building things for nonprofits across the board. And there's a lot of resources here that I think could be beneficial. So not only the webinars, which you get the recording, but things like working from home, how to actually go about it, some tips. I know myself, it's been an interesting change. And then really, really practical guides on, here's a template for an email out to donors. Here's a script for some of your volunteers or some of your staff when they're calling donors. We've seen those two used now quite a few times by different partners, all to great success. So I'd encourage you, please take them, adapt them, make them your own, and try and use them as much as possible. You'll see the link there at the bottom will take you to that page. Gonna wrap it up. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Again, brilliant from the panelists, and they will be sticking around. You'll get a survey in a few minutes. My colleague Leah has just shared that. Encourage you just to complete it. It'll take just a few minutes, and you can see the impact of your insights in directing today's conversation. And we're going to keep on that sort of trajectory. So anyone who has to leave us now, thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. Fill in the survey, keep us in the loop, and we'll speak to you next time. For anyone who's sticking around, I'm actually going to kick it back to Jada to run a bit more of a informal Q&A and address that fundraising question.
Thanks, David. And it looks like we do still have a number of folks on the call, so I appreciate continuing conversation and a little extra time. Where we kind of left off, and Heather, you mentioned this a few times in your response to how you guys are actually thinking about fundraising, who you're kind of targeting. Those refunds and those canceled events obviously aren't the only thing threatening annual budgets right now. The economy is in a really interesting spot, and so starting to think about those reliable donors and what kind of position they might be in is going to be important. While most people, it seems on this call from our survey results, are still kind of in phase one of making sure that donors are called and supported and that, generally stewarded, there's a few, almost 80% that are halting or seriously changing those solicitations. Daniel, can you tell us a little bit about how Pacific Lutheran is changing those kind of face-to-face communications or planned appeals, and what things you guys took into consideration whenever you were deciding how to move forward with a new strategy?
I think being tone deaf to a person's context is always a bad idea. But I think it can be especially problematic in this current context. So we've talked a lot about customizing our approach for people. In terms of major gifts, which, donor activity. We've been doing something similar to Heather and others, working through those portfolios, calling people with just care calls, checking in, how are you doing? But also not being afraid to ask the question more explicitly, to say, how is this context affecting how you think about philanthropy? And we're hearing some very consistent responses from people. We're hearing, especially from folks with higher net worth, family foundations, consistently, I plan on fulfilling my obligations. I still care deeply about the mission of PLU. In fact, I know it's more important than ever. However, I'm not thinking about a new commitment at this point. Now, that was just last week, right? And so I think also taking a breath for all of us and to say that we're only 3 to 4 weeks into this right now. The market's all over the place. We don't know what's happening there exactly. So let's think about how we're engaging folks, and let's not be afraid to ask. I think the worst thing we can do is make assumptions about where people are and then not engage them at all, or just sit back kind of fearfully waiting. The second thing we're talking about a lot is that we are not the target audience. So just because I'm at home with 2 kids and it's somewhat chaotic here and I feel somewhat, financially insecure, doesn't mean that's where my donor is right now. And so I really need to broad appeal our annual fund completely. Our students are 40% Pell eligible, about 42% first generation. So the financial concern was the biggest one for them. And we have 2 avenues for student care. One is just things that are non-financial. We have a student care team that takes referrals and then tries to triage the issue for the student. But the other is financial. And so the financial aid office is issuing emergency scholarships to students who have lost employment. And so our emergency fund is specifically targeted at replacing those lost student employment dollars. The thing we're doing is, so we're going back to donors and pivoting to say, is this priority still important to you, especially in terms of major gifts that were already in the pipeline? So one example, a donor was planning to give a $10,000 gift to fund a music competition this next year. Well, the competition can't happen. And so the gift officer is now working with that donor to say, is this still a priority for you? If not, here is a present need where your dollars could really make a true impact for students. And so pivoting those donors to the Student Emergency Fund. In terms of our annual appeals and the annual fund, all budget related. To Heather's point, we don't yet know the full financial impact. We've got an estimate of what the CARE Act will do in terms of the Pell eligible students we have, but yet we're also looking at a loss in revenue. So, and then in terms of practical planning, we're planning a 3-month, our fiscal year starts June 1. And so because there are just so many unknowns, we're looking at a 3-month budget and a 9-month budget. And working with the board to say a lot can change between now and August, and we need to remain nimble in this uncertain time. I think the other piece in terms of the communications that were planned, our biggest capital project currently is an expansion. It's a doubling of our nursing program. Doubling the square footage. It's perhaps our most premier program. And given what's happening right now, the need for trained healthcare workers is greater than ever. So we're continuing to push on that, continuing to tell that story, and then focusing on the emergency fund as kind of the 2 major thrusts of our activity this spring. But the biggest piece for me is not being afraid to have those conversations. I think we can sit around talking ourselves out of things so easily. And I was just talking to one of my gift officers yesterday. She was apprehensive. She was scared about engaging a particular donor. Spent probably 2 days crafting an email. Almost immediately and said, I'd love to have a Skype, like a video conversation with you. That sounds great. Let's have happy hour at 4:00 on Tuesday. Okay. So better to be in front of them and asking and engaging. And I love that you shared Jerry Panis's quote at the beginning, because there's never a perfect time. So we have to be having those conversations, I think.
Absolutely. I think a lot of the current partners that are listening to today's session probably hear me say all too often not to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We have to take advantage of the hand that we're dealt, and so thank you for that answer, Daniel. I think that was really comforting to a lot of people, just to kind of hear what others are doing in many different facets. I think at this point, I would love to go ahead and kick it over to Leah, who has been kind of running our Q&A section. We want to make sure that we're answering some questions live, so she will go ahead and address either Heather or Daniel to answer these questions. But if you would like to hear from one of them specifically, then please do mention that in your Q&A submission.
Great, thank you, Jada. So there've been of masks, so thank you to the UT Austin and Shepherd University teams for sharing some of their resources. Heather and Daniel, a lot of questions around emergency funds, and so you touched on this a little bit, but to the extent that you can speak about your own experience or what you're hearing from colleagues, questions around who's running point on this within the university, is it the annual fund, and what specifically are those funds being used up for?
Sure, I'll start. Since the fund was in place before, it exists we had the so it's restricted annual fund, so it doesn't count towards our unrestricted goal. It is not, in theory, budget relieving, though when you think about sort of what our most immediate needs are right now, I mean, this does fit within that. So, but we're okay with that. And this is one of those things where sometimes it's the right thing to do regardless of whether or not we feel like it potentially could compete. We're not, those are the kinds of things we are not worrying about right now. So it is being run through our annual giving office. So our director of annual giving is really the one running point on all of that. The authority lies exclusively with our dean of students, and that's the way it's always been set up, and it's really intentional. Partly because we found that honestly she was paying for things out of her own pocket, let alone her own budget, and that was really that was really the impetus to start this fund when we did. So they're making, they really are making the decision sort of on the ground right there too. And we know that that's the fund. That fund is going to continue to exist. People will continue to support it too, but it's going to, if it has to support our students coming back to a commencement or graduates coming back to a commencement, a year from now, we're going to do it. Whatever it is, it meets those particular pastoral needs of our students, that's what it's going to go for. So that's how we're doing it at our school.
And I think I addressed this a little bit, but it's primarily, the Student Emergency Fund is primarily for students who have experienced some sort of financial hardship because of what's happened. And the biggest impact is student employment loss. So that particular fund is being managed through the Student Financial Services Office. Students have to apply for this emergency funding or an emergency scholarship. The added benefit there is that they have to fill out some description of what their experience has been. And so we're getting some quantitative data to some really breaking stories of students who have both lost employment, multiple jobs at the same time, whose parents have lost employment, a spouse has lost employment, someone has an immune deficiency or other thing, and so they can't work, they have to be home caring for them. So we are also then using that content to help with our appeals. And so we're both doing a combination of crowdfunding and replacing some of our traditional appeals. We pivoted what was going to be a spring push for scholarships to be a spring push for this emergency fund. And it's being run through in terms of the actual campaign, annual it, but the major gift officers are also supporting it with donor work.
Great, thank you, Daniel. On that note, I have a question about how metrics may be changing for your major giving officers. Curious if either of you can speak to any adjustments you've made.
It's a little bit ongoing. Like I said, the first thing I asked all of them to do was the most immediate: meet your immediate donor, visit needs, do the right thing there. But that second part is, I mean, for me, I am serious about them getting through their time. And they do all the reaching out, I want them to actually go through and be planful. Often that work, there's a perception that major gift work isn't scalable, and I just am not of an opinion that that's true. So by going through and looking at where patterns are, as you look through that entire portfolio, it did allow for us to then evaluate where there were opportunities to better leverage our administrative support staff, find, better engage our marketing team, our alum relations team. So really looking at that. So that was my first metric. We cleaned out some stuff too, as well, but it really was that was the most important thing immediately. So that's my first metric. Sort of beyond that, then we will look at, we are shifting and hoping to find that those Zoom calls will be able to replace a percentage of visits, and looking at what the right number is right now in my head. I don't know if any of them are on this call, but in my head, I'm really thinking if we can get to a point where we're maybe replacing half of our face-to-face visits with Zoom calls, I'm probably going to be pretty okay with that, to be really frank, especially if it's the right group. And then beyond that, I think our most important metric will be the annual giving, their percentage of their annual giving goal. So they all have a portion of that yield in their portfolios. They're responsible for giving projections to our annual giving team. And right now, especially since we've hit that our campaign goal, right now, actively working those projections in a thoughtful way is really the most important metric for us at this moment.
I would affirm everything Heather said. In fact, just because she's so great at running her team. I think a couple things I would add would be, we focus a lot on having impact conversations versus a dollar conversation. And if you're familiar with the group Plus Delta Partners, most of all of our gift officers have been through that training. And so we try to focus on, what is the impact that you want to have? Is this priority still the way in which you want to have an impact on let's talk in a vehicle and all those other things. And so we're being very flexible when it comes to thinking about 5-year pledges and how we do kind of balloon payments, for lack of a better term, or thinking about flexibility there. We're also, we're doing some analysis to look at where, for a lot of us, QCDs have been a significant growing portion of our major gift revenue. And with the change in the CARES Act, we know that we challenge this next year. And so we are a little anxious in terms of that piece. On the other hand, most of those no property. And so do we have an opportunity to think about planned giving in a different way? I mean, this directly relates to the work of free will and questions we've been asking ourselves. We know that folks want to think about their will more than ever. We're thinking about our mortality more than ever. But how do you engage in those conversations in a way that's sensitive and thoughtful and doesn't appear predatory or opportunistic? And so for me, that goes back to focusing on impact, focusing on relationship, continuing to move those conversations forward, realizing that just the timing may be different, but the impact may be the same. In terms of to keep those goals as high as possible. One of the other things I've appreciated is, I'm sure for any of us that manage a team, we're finding that our time is stretched in different ways because we can't stop by the cube for 5 minutes and talk through that one thing. And so we've actually paired all of our gift officers up with each other. And so in terms of little dyads, and they check in with each other on a daily basis to say, or sometimes a couple times a week, just to say, what are your goals for this week? What are you focused on? Where are you stuck? How can I support you? And just to talk through it with each other, trying to replace some of those informal conversations.
Great. Thank you so much, Daniel. Here at FreeWill, we also have daily coffee talk. It's a Zoom invite and a chance to sort of dish on all things we're facing. So a few more questions here. You know, one does have to do with the CARE Act broadly. You each have touched on it. And so I want to surface that we at FreeWill are actually going to have a dedicated webinar to talk specifically about those IRA distributions. So I might hold on that for just a moment. We did just get another question, though, about pipeline work and how you are going about discovery and prospecting in such a different landscape.
I'll start. So that was one of my motivators, actually, in having them go through and make a planned outreach, you know, and having them be really targeted. So we here at St. Ben's have a really strong parent fundraising culture. We don't have a parent relations team. It's probably just a product of us being a women's college, to be totally frank, and of the type where parents are really actively involved in the decision making of getting their students to campus. And so we want that to who are in this position likely to answer a phone when they see our area code, they're going to pick up. So, but then also making sure that that family had whatever needs taken care of that they did. And of course, they're really different than some of our other parent needs. But if those parents have a person that they know they can go to and get questions answered, it also meant that we were likely going to be helping our student development team free up time to focus on much greater needs. So you know, those were the kinds of things. Now that particular parent who maybe hadn't been as engaged as we wanted them to be, in the future, they know who to contact and who to be involved with. And so, like, again, as we looked at all of those segments, as we did the work and thinking through and shared with each other the ideas we were having for outreach, people are raising their hands and we are learning more a little bit about them. They're not necessarily raising their hands to give right now. Again, Daniel's point is a great one. It is about impact. But for now, we're able to have the conversations with people and find out who in this time is interested in being more engaged with us. And that is helping us then project out a little bit more over time. So that's the sort of initial moment when you think about pipelining for us.
I don't have a lot to add beyond that. I think we're in a very similar boat, and there's just so much uncertainty. We are I think we are more immediately focused as we think about the last 2 months of our fiscal year and the activity that we're trying to. I'm sure everyone's gift officers are very different than the ones I work with, but there seems to be a frenetic activity that typically happens in May, and so I am a little bit worried as we kind of move into that period now. We'll see a much bigger depth in terms of that activity.
Wonderful. Thank
One
you
thing I'll
both.
add just one thing I will add too that somebody else shared recently that was helpful, I think, is often in higher ed, we're so upstream. It feels that way, right? I mean, we just don't have that immediate impact that other organizations can have and can say. But here in this moment, it becomes all that much more apparent how immediate our work really, really is. You know, that the work of our staff to keep folks safe while we were still open, and as we were transitioning to completely the way they do their work, to make sure that we were continuing to provide that quality education. We have a moment now. I feel like our responsibility is to demonstrate that impact, to just bring it alive for people in whatever space it is that works for them. And so that's our gift, I think, to the organizations that we serve and to the people who advance the mission on that boots on the ground way that sometimes we don't. But it's a rare opportunity we have to bring that upstream, you know, front and center in people's lives. So the gifts, I would say, the situation we're in.
Thank you both. So I'm going to hand it back to David to close us out, but certainly if you have additional questions, please fill out the survey. Let us know what's on your mind.
Thanks, guys. And, you know, what a perfect way to end with Heather's little statement there. I'm trying to categorize it. was brilliant. It was great, and I think she's completely right. This is a unique time, but what a unique opportunity. So glad to hear your insights. Thank you again, everyone who's attended, who's been part of this. We're going to log off now, but fill in the survey, let us know, and keep an eye out for the email for 2 weeks' time when we get into more of those little conversations that Daniel had actually talked about his major gift officers doing. So get into it. Have a brilliant rest of the day, guys. All the best. See you later.